All right, hello and welcome back to English class. Today we are continuing with our work on our twist analysis for Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. Yesterday we did the T and the W, the title and the what is it about. Today we're doing the I and the S, talking about imagery and style. We're going to talk more about that, what that looks like later. For now, let's go over your objective. So today your objective is I can complete the IS part of the twist strategy for Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. We're going to work through Harlem. I'm going to show you how to do this for Harlem, and then you'll do it on your own for Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. All right, on the agenda today, we have your do now, which you're about to do. Watch this video. You're already here. You're doing it. Then you're going to do your IS practice, and then finally you'll have an exit ticket. All right, when I say go, you can go ahead and pause this video, complete your do now on your digital worksheet, which is to define a couple of words, then come back here when you're ready to continue, go. All right, you're back, you finished your do now, excellent. We're ready to move on to the next thing, dive into our IS analysis, which is our main focus today. So we're starting with imagery. This is a recap of what our imagery slide looked like when we were first taking notes on Twist on Monday. When we're thinking about imagery, we're thinking about when the author is describing in detail how something looks, smells, sounds, or feels. Whenever you're reading something and you feel like you can get a really clear picture in your head of what the author or the poet is describing, it's probably because they're using imagery. We also know when a writer is using imagery, it's usually because the thing that they're describing is important in some way. They wouldn't take the time to describe it in detail if it wasn't important. So the other question we want to answer when we're talking about imagery is what makes that thing that the author is describing important to the author or to the poem. So that's a recap of imagery, and dive into showing you what this looks like for our poem Harlem by Langston Hughes. Since we haven't read this poem since yesterday, I'm going to start by just reading it through without stopping. It's really short. Harlem by Langston Hughes. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? All right, now it's time to look at my imagery questions. First, I have, where do you notice the author describing how something looks, smells, sounds, or feels in detail? Now, looking back at my poem, there is a ton of imagery. In fact, almost the whole poem I could use as an example of imagery, because in every line, he's describing in detail, like something that might happen to a dream when it's deferred or put off. But the lines that stood out to me the most is, does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar, does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? And I think that stood out to me because it's like, I can really picture rotten meat. And also the fact that he's describing smell here, he's using stink, that makes me think that it's a good example of imagery. And that like is really gross, the idea of rotten meat that's all stinky. And then he puts it right next to crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet, which is a much more pleasant image. So that contrast really drew me in and made me want to use it as my example of imagery. So I wrote my quote, does it stink like rotten meat or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? A couple of things I want to point out to you about my quote. First, I used quotation marks like you should always do. That's nothing new. Then I put in parentheses, instead of a page number for poems, you're going to put a line number. So that quote is from lines 5 through 7. So in parentheses, I wrote lines 5 through 7. You should do that same thing with your quotes from Still I Rise. Finally, this is totally new. When you're quoting from a poem, you don't actually want to put in the line breaks. Like you don't want to press enter when the line changes. Instead, you just put a little slash in your quote so that the reader knows that that was a line break. You don't actually press the enter button. You just put this little slash. So that's what I did here. All right, that's my quote. And then I had to answer my second question. What makes that thing important in the poem? And when I was thinking about what made it important, I really noticed the contrast between the grossness of the meat and the like pleasantness of the sugar and the syrup. So that's what I talked about in my explanation. I wrote, the poet is contrasting a disgusting image with a more pleasant one. The contrast highlights the range of things that might happen when a dream is put off. Putting a dream off might result in good things or in bad ones. So that was my explanation. Now that you've seen me do this for Harlem, when I say go, you're going to try this on your own for Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. On the next slide, you're going to see exactly where you should be in your digital worksheet. You're answering these 2 questions for Still I Rise, just like I did for Harlem. If you're having a hard time when you're trying to do this work, please just stop where you are, call me or text me so I can help you through it. All right, this is where you should be in your digital worksheet. Go, pause the video, come back when you finish this imagery section. All right, I hope you did great work with that imagery section. We're ready to move on to our next step, which is style. So this is a recap of what our style slide looks like when we were first taking notes on Twist. We've got 3 style questions. Does the author use figurative language? What do you notice about how the poem is structured? And what is the author's sentence structure like? So if you recall, when we were first learning about style, I said we don't necessarily want to answer all 3 of these questions for every poem. We're just picking one that really stands out to us and really seems important to us in the poem and analyzing that. We're picking either figurative language, structure, or sentence structure. And for both Harlem and Still I Rise, the question I want us to focus on is figurative language. That's what we're going to analyze for style in both Harlem and Still I Rise. Now, figurative language can be a little bit challenging. I forgot to put a listening ear on this slide. You don't need to worry about switching to your digital worksheet. You should just be listening. Now, figurative language can be challenging because there are a bunch of different things that can count as figurative language. Remember that figurative language is when the author is using words in a really creative and interesting way. But we're only focusing on 4 types of figurative language today, and we'll talk about them each one by one. These are the words you just find for your do now, so should be a recap. First one is simile. A simile is a type of figurative language which is used to compare one thing to another. Similes compare the likeness of 2 things, often feature the words like or as strong as an ox, as brave as an ox. So a simile is a comparison between 2 things using the words like or as. Next we have metaphor. A metaphor is a phrase describing something as something it is not in reality. It is used to compare 2 things symbolically. A metaphor literally describes something as something it is not. Love is a battlefield. So a simile is a comparison using the words like or as. A metaphor is a comparison that does not use the words like or as. Next, we have alliteration. Alliteration is a type of figurative speech in which the repetition of letters or sounds is used within one sentence. For example, eagles end up eating entrails. So that might sound a little bit complicated. It's basically just when an author is using the same letter to start words over and over again. So a lot of tongue twisters have a lot of alliteration. Sally sells shells by the seashore. Lots of S's, that's alliteration. Here we have eagles end up eating entrails. Lots of E's, that's alliteration. Anytime the author is starting words with the same letter over and over again, that's an example of alliteration. Finally, we have rhyme. This should be really straightforward. Hopefully you guys are very familiar with what rhyme is. These are words that have the same vowel sound in them: night, kite, flight, sight, bite, or like hat, cat, bat, mat. All examples of rhymes. And rhyming is used a lot in poems, although it doesn't exist in all poems. All right, now we can talk about style for Harlem. So my first question is, does the author use figurative language? We just talked about my 4 types of figurative language. The kind that Langston Hughes really uses over and over again in this poem, there's one kind that he uses repeatedly throughout the poem. I want you to make a guess just in your head. You don't have to write it down anywhere. What do you think I'm going to say is the kind of figurative language that Langston Hughes uses over and over again? Is it simile, metaphor, alliteration, or rhyme? Make your guess. Make sure you have it in your head. All right, if you said simile, you were correct, because Langston Hughes uses simile over and over and over again throughout this poem. He's constantly comparing a bunch of different things to the idea of a dream deferred, to a dream that's been put off. And I know that it's a simile because I see him using this word like over and over again throughout the poem. Almost every line in this poem is a simile. He's comparing a dream to a raisin. He's comparing a dream to a sword. He's comparing a dream to rotten meat. So because there are so many similes, I had to pick just 3. So I just picked 3 that I hadn't used before when I was talking about imagery. The ones that I picked were, does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, fester like a sore, and maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Those are my 3 similes. So now I have to go to my second question, which is the analysis piece. What does the figurative language contribute to the meaning of the poem? So I looked back at the poem, I read it again, and I was thinking, okay, so the simile is so repetitive. I feel like it's really giving me this idea that Langston Hughes is uncertain about these things that he's putting forward. Like, he doesn't really know if a dream that's put off is like a raisin in the sun. He doesn't really know if a dream that's put off is like a sword. He's not sure. And then we have this last line, which is the only line in the entire poem that is not a simile, or does it explode? And when I got to that line, because I didn't see the word like or as, I didn't see a comparison, it really made me feel like that was the one that Langston Hughes had landed on. That was the one he was sure of. This is the real answer to the question he asks at the beginning of the poem. What happens to a dream deferred? It explodes at some point. And because it's not a simile, that's what gives me that sense of certainty. So I wrote about that in my explanation. I have Langston Hughes includes similes to show a sense of uncertainty about what will happen when a dream is put off. This highlights the last line, further emphasized by italics. That's more of a structured thing, but I wanted to include it, which is the only line of the poem not to include a simile. This leads the reader to believe that the last line is the one that truly answers the question in the first line, what happens to a dream deferred? All right. So just like I did for Harlem, you're going to do the same work for Still I Rise. When I say go, you're going to pause the video. You're going to find 3 examples of figurative language in Still I Rise. They may or may not be similes. That was just what was there in Harlem. You're finding 3 examples of figurative language. Then you're choosing one of them to write an explanation of how it is important to the meaning of the poem. If that's confusing, if you're not sure what to do, please stop, text me, call me, let me know that you need a little help, and I'm happy to help. All right, this is where you should be in your digital worksheet in this little box. Go ahead, pause the video, do that work in your digital worksheet, come back when you're done. All right, thank you so much for all of your hard work today. I know that we had a lot to do, and this was some challenging analysis, but I can't wait to see what you guys wrote because I know you did a really awesome job of coming up with all of this great analysis. And I really love this poem, Still I Rise. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I do. All right, so we're moving on to the last part of our lesson, which is our exit ticket. Go ahead and pause this video and go back to your digital worksheet, click the exit ticket link, answer the multiple choice questions, then you are done for the day. Great work, awesome job. If you need any help with anything, feel free to reach out. I am here. And thank you again for your hard work.